Good day, and welcome to this special edition of Silver River Investigates. I'm Erin Benavides.
And I'm Alan Ivory.
And today, we're talking about stimulus. No, not the money that the government sends you, but something that causes an effect.
Some examples of stimulus would be like if you look at a bright light and your pupils start to dilate or get smaller. Another example of stimulus would be like whenever you have a hot cup in your hands and it starts to burn your hands, so your hands pull away. It's just a natural reaction. It's a response to stimulus.
So what we want to investigate today is whether or not plants, like humans, respond to stimulus.
Now for this investigation, we're not doing a controlled experiment where we're controlling things in a lab. What we are doing is observing nature to see what's going on.
So let's take it out into the field. Let's make some observations of plants and let's see if we can collect evidence to answer the question, do plants respond to stimuli?
So now I'm out in the hammock. Next to me is a few different oak trees. Now, typical oak tree growth has the roots going down in the ground while the shoot goes up in the air. Makes sense. But you can also see there's another oak tree down here that's going horizontal to the ground. Now, its root is sticking out of the ground. What's really interesting is the new root growth is also going straight down into the ground like it should be. And the new growth for the shoot is going back up in the air, again, like it should be. So here behind me is another example I want to show you. This is a palm tree that fell out over the water many years ago. A typical palm tree would grow straight up and down, like any other tree really. But since this palm tree fell over, its shoot is going out horizontal over the water. But the new growth of this tree is growing vertically straight up in the air. While the roots we can see are uprooted, but there's evidence that the roots are now going down to support it again. In both of these examples, a change occurred and the plant responded to it. What do you think that stimuli was, and how did the plant respond?
I'm here in an upland habitat which is dominated by pine trees and oak trees, and behind me is a sand pine tree that's growing in a very unusual way. Typically, we think of pine trees as growing straight up. In fact, they're so straight that we use them to make light poles out of. But this pine tree is surrounded by other very large trees. And so notice the growth of this pine tree, rather than straight up and down, like we would typically see, is in a curved fashion until it eventually grows up at the end. I'm in the sandhill of Silver Springs State Park, which is about the highest elevation, and this habitat is characterized by these trees, longleaf pine trees. And the one behind me is growing in a very typical fashion, straight up to the sky. But this one is atypical. Notice the trunk of the tree and the curve. It's almost shaped like an S. So what is happening that is making this tree grow in such an unusual way? So what's going on? Why are these plants growing in seemingly unusual ways? Now that we've made some observations, let's dig a little deeper into some scientist-controlled experiments to learn more.
Take a look at these bean seeds here. They're all oriented the same way, and as these seeds start to grow, the roots go down while the sprouts go up. But after a few days of growth, the seeds were rotated 90 degrees. Well, once those seeds felt that new change, they then grew their roots to the new up and down, also rotating 90 degrees.
Let's look at another investigation. In this investigation, bean seeds were used again. And in one example, the bean seeds were allowed to grow with light from directly above. And then in the other group, the seeds were given light off to the side, almost like a maze that they had to go through. And if you notice, the shoots directed themselves towards the light. In the example where the light was above, the shoots grew straight up. When the light was positioned to the side, the shoots bent toward the light. So what's really causing these changes? Let's go back outside to learn more about the stimuli that will cause plants to grow in these unusual ways.
Now that we've made observations out in the real world, as well as looked at controlled experiments of others, let's see what's causing this unusual growth.
Think back to the bean plant in the maze and the pine trees that we saw out in the woods. You know that one thing that all plants need to grow is light. And so plants respond to the stimulus of light. Their leaves and their shoots are going to grow towards the light. And this is why we saw the bean plant in the maze grow towards the light. It's why we saw the crooked sand pine that was shaded by the bigger trees trying to seek the light, and the crooked longleaf pine that was shaded by the larger longleaf pine right beside it. This is known as phototropism, which is just a fancy way of science saying growth towards the light. So, plants respond to the stimulus of light.
Now let's talk about those fallen over trees, as well as the seeds that were turned. What was causing the unusual growth to occur? Well, what was occurring is gravitropism, or where the plants were responding to the stimuli of gravity. So what happened is the roots would go down with gravity, and the shoot would go exactly away from gravity.
So as our special investigative report has shown, plants all around us respond to their environment. We've seen their response to light and gravity, phototropism and gravitropism, but there are other stimuli that plants respond to. So take some time and explore your world and see if you can make observations of plants that might be growing in an unusual way and figure out what's going on.
One such plant to investigate is the resurrection fern, which responds to a whole different stimuli than we've talked about so far. This plant can be found at your house, at school, all over the place. It's very plentiful.
So we hope that you will take some time, find some resurrection fern, or do some research on it and figure out what will cause it to change in its environment. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.